Hey guys.
Hey everyone.
So we're here doing week 8.
Very excited to start week 8 with you guys. We are just going to hop into a summary of week 8 and then just continue on. So for week 8, let me flip there, please. So week 8 is where we're going to get into Leviticus and all the weird ritual laws. And that's kind of the biggest summary. These laws are usually about cleanliness, but they're also about holiness and living a moral and pure life. All right, Mom, what's your questions?
All right. So first, what is a hyrax? I'm guessing that's something that no longer exists.
I have also asked this. I don't know.
So this Leviticus 11 through 14 is basically telling us all the stuff that you could eat and cannot eat. And we kind of know all of those. It's everything that I like pork and shellfish. It tells you what all inside the water, in the sky, and on land that you can eat. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff that I really like. I love pork. Hello, my name is Leanne, and I love pork. I hate that because it's bad for you.
You also can't eat shrimp.
Yeah, shrimp makes me swell up, but
according to this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, but I love it. It's bad for me, and I love it. So they continues to go on, and it's just telling you all the stuff that you can't eat because it says you must be holy because I am holy. In other words, because we're his people, we need to be an example of him.
So, really important. God is not saying it's immoral to eat these foods intrinsically, like normally. It does become immoral because he tells them not to. So if they disobey him, then these people are sinning. But the reason why he tells them not to do this is because he is setting them apart from the rest of the nations so that way they can see, oh, they act different, they live different. They don't do these things.
They only eat like the clean animals.
Yeah, they eat these specific kinds of animals, not these ones that we eat. And so they can be seen as separate and special and unique because they are.
Yeah, the clean animals just means, or the word clean, it says just means able to approach God and worship. I did have the question, I noticed that said, did they not eat these before? So at this time, how many years has it been since creation?
I mean,
a lot of years. So
they've been eating
that, all of these things
since Noah.
Yeah. So now they're forbidden to eat that, just so that they can be holy and set apart.
At Mount Sinai, they were given the food purity laws.
Right.
And if you ever become unclean, either by accident or for some other reason, you have to take a certain process outlined in Leviticus to become clean again. Now, being unclean does not make you immoral. It just means you cannot approach God in his sanctuary to worship him. Now, if you do approach God in his sanctuary where you are unclean, you are doing something wrong and will face a punishment. Other than that, it's not necessarily like you're not being evil by eating a pig normally. Now, the Lord gave them specific commands now, so if the Israelites ate pigs now on purpose, then they would be sinning. But other things like a woman on her period, she just became unclean. Same with a man in certain situations. It's just you can't approach God like this because God requires a certain amount of sanctity and purity to approach him in worship. But that doesn't mean you're not part of his people. still part of his people. I'm stressing that because some people will say, some people can use this to try to demean people. Yeah. Oh, women, they're unclean for longer, so that means they must be more bad or more evil than men. Well, no, it just means that they aren't in a state fit to approach the Lord in worship for longer than men. But that doesn't mean they've done something wrong. I'm trying to just stress that because God made both of them in his image.
So then another little point that I was noticing was that when people mourn, they rip their clothes and they take their hair down so that their hair hangs loose. I thought that was wild. So apparently all the other times they have it pulled back. And when you're mourning, you leave it hanging. So, because every place that was talking about that, it would say hair hanging loose. I thought that was something that I had never read before or had forgotten about. And they shave their head, their beard, their eyebrows, and the rest of the hair on their body.
Presumably that was most of the men that would shave their hair on their head.
Well, I know in one part, it did have women had to shave their head for something. I can't
Specifically,
remember.
If it targets women, then they have to do it. But I think in general, it was the men who shaved their hair and the women just let it hang loose in times of mourning. Severe mourning, the women would shave their heads too.
Say that again.
Severe mourning or specific cases of mourning, they would, like you said.
And this is just talking about how, when you're on your period, you're unclean for 7 days. There's always the number 7, if you look all the way through here. So this one's like, they must no longer offer their sacrifices to the goat demons that they have prostituted themselves with. This will be a permanent statute to them throughout their generations. So I'm assuming that they've made an image of a goat and they're worshiping it. And of course, that would mean that they're worshiping Satan, because there are no other gods. So if you're worshiping some sort of idol, you're actually worshiping Satan.
You're worshiping what the Bible calls unclean spirits.
Yeah.
And in that case, it uses the term unclean to mean evil.
And I know that this is where he starts saying no incest, no marrying within your family.
You can't even marry your stepsister.
Right. So he puts limitations now, finally, on, I don't mean that ugly. I mean, it's just now is the time that he makes it taboo to marry within your, like, marry your sister, marry your mother, marry your father, whatever, that kind of thing. I noticed that several times that he's talking about, is it Moses that's writing this? I forgot.
Yes, ma'am. Moses writes the first 5 books of the Bible up until the point where it says he dies.
Yeah. So I noticed that he is repeatedly talks about no eating of the lifeblood, no eating of the blood.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wonder why.
He explains specifically that the life is in the blood, and it is used to make atonement for you. So, since the life is in the blood, and it's used for making atonement, you can't just eat it like it's any other meat. So, it is sacred, and we will not be able to eat this because the life in the blood represents life, okay? So think about it this way. Person loses all their blood, they die. You need blood to be alive, physically speaking. So blood represents life, right? And so you can't eat the blood of these animals because it's supposed to be taking your place, not being ingested by you like food. The life of the animal needs to take your place, not be eaten by you. That's why it's used for purification. So when the blood when the animal's life takes your place, you can't eat the blood because it's already taken your place. You use the blood as purification for that altar, for yourself, for the other things. So since it's taking your place, it's covering your sins and making and cleaning you. It took the punishment in your place. So its life is spilt for you. This is all like foreshadowing Jesus, by the way. Because as it says in the New Testament, the blood of animals can't take away sins.
Right.
So it's temporary. It's something God has put in place for them so they can be with him until Jesus comes and dies for everyone to save them.
So then on day 2, it goes into talking about not sacrificing your children in the fire to Molech.
Yeah.
Other detestable acts like incest, homosexuality, and bestiality. It's very obvious that God is against incest, homosexuality, bestiality, and human sacrifice. Well, Jesus gave himself. He sacrificed his own self. But it's very obvious that...
That's when God gave his own life for us, though.
Right.
Which is a different case than just another human saying, I'm going to kill my baby so that way we can have a good harvest.
Right.
It's God saying through the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, the Father gives the Son volunteers to go, right, and the Holy Spirit works in the midst of the people. The Son's life brings the atonement. The Father is willing and makes this plan to save everyone, and then the Holy Spirit's putting it into work in everything. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but if you notice in chapter 18, it says this is different than just the normal Mount Sinai laws. It's in there, but it's not the exact same. So the normal Mount Sinai laws are done away with, like the ritual, these ritual laws that we get of how to make a sacrifice, how to cleanse yourself if you're ritually impure, these things like that. That stuff doesn't really apply to us anymore because we don't need to make sacrifices because of Jesus, and we don't need to keep food cleanliness laws because Jesus did away with those. But we know this part is not part of just ritual cleanliness, because in chapter 18, it says, speak to the Israelites and tell them, I am the Lord your God. Do not follow the practices of the land of Egypt where you used to live, or follow the practices of the land of Canaan where I am bringing you. You must not follow their customs. You are to keep my statutes and follow them. So he's saying the things right after I'm done talking about this, these are the things they did. And this is why they're in trouble. This is why I'm against them. It's not just about cleanliness laws anymore to make you set apart. It's about moral laws. You aren't supposed to be living this way, even if you're like them and not part of my covenant. So,
well, I was saying that,
and that's where all of the sexual laws come in. All these sexual intercourse laws come into play right after he's done saying that. But so he's saying these people practice these abominable sexual acts, and you can't do that. They weren't supposed to do it, and you definitely can't do it because you're my people.
What I was saying was that, he says right here, these are detestable acts. And then later we also see other things in the Bible about homosexuality and all of that. I'm unsure where people come up with that homosexuality, that God's okay with it.
Well, they'll say this is the Old Testament and dismiss it and say it no longer applies.
In the New Testament.
Well, the issue is the sections that talk about these aren't just ritual cleanliness laws that you can just do away with, that Jesus did away with. It's couched in a section about these are the practices of the foreign peoples, and you can't do them. And I punished them for doing it.
Right.
So they weren't even a part of my covenant. This isn't even about primarily just the Mount Sinai covenant anymore. It's anyone who did these is in the wrong. But you are my people. So you're definitely in the wrong. So you can't do this. Because in verse 24 of that, which is right after he's done explaining all these things, It says, do not defile yourself by any of these practices. And this is chapter 18, verse 24. For the nations I am driving out before you defiled themselves with all these things, and the land has become defiled. So I am punishing it for its iniquity, and the land will vomit out its inhabitants. But you're going to keep my statutes and ordinances. You cannot commit any of these detestable acts. If you do it, it will vomit you out too. So he's saying, look, because of these things, I kicked them out of their land as punishment.
Yeah, he did.
And a lot of them died in that process too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do it, it's definitely going to vomit you out too. It's like, he's saying, look, I love you, but there ain't no special treatment here in that way.
Right. Not when it comes to detestable acts.
Not when it comes to who I am and my holiness and my justice. So also child sacrifice to Molech is inside of this section of things that they did that God was kicking these people out for. But if you notice, it's a bunch of sexual activities and then child sacrifice.
Right.
And so that doesn't mean that's the only things that are still relevant, obviously. But then right after that, he says in chapter 19, be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Mm-hmm. So, yes.
Well then, a lot of people, and I hear this all the time from pastors, will say when people are talking about getting a tattoo, they're like, you need to go read Leviticus. They always say that, always. And when we were researching all this stuff about tattoos, that's what people always told me, like, go read Leviticus. And so it is in this part, Leviticus 19:28, you are not to make gashes on your body for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself. I am the Lord.
Yep. Now, so some people will connect the tattoo marks back to the dead and say, look, you can't do it for the dead.
So I don't know.
I don't know exactly, but it is in a section of things that are mostly continuing commands. There are a few things in verse 19, like you can't put two different kinds in a garment. So not all of these per se. The rules about no crossbreeding and not intermixing is so they would be a living example of they aren't supposed to of purity. They can't intermix with the nations. But are we under the same covenant command to not intermix with the nations in that same sense? Yes, we aren't supposed to intermix with the nations, but are we called to represent it through our clothing like them?
Well, I know we're called not to marry non-believers because we're not supposed to be yoked.
We shouldn't intermix with the non-believers.
Right. But other than that, I don't think that just from the Bible that you shouldn't intermix with other nationalities or other people. But as far as like...
No, I was just pointing that out, though. It's in the same section as some of these other rules that you have to look at each rule on a case-by-case basis and ask, why was it commanded? Was it commanded for them in their time and in their place as a representation of their purity? And are we also called in that same way to represent our purity that way? Or is it just a moral command? Like, hold on. You are not to practice divination or witchcraft.
Well, I ain't got to that. No divination or witchcraft. No mediums or spiritists. And rise for the elderly and honor the old. Are right after, I
don't think those things just disappeared when the new covenant came into play.
And then what about the no tattoos, though? Because here I'm sitting with two tattoos. One that I got when I was in the world and one that I got after I gave my life back to Christ. So it's a really hard thing. And I sat here and supported my son getting one.
Well,
not Reagan, Trey.
There is the difference because during that time period...
Because I just felt like that it was talking about in forms of worship. And that was
definitely not worship.
That was not what we were doing.
It would be, if anything, the context indicates it's for the dead. You're not to make gashes on your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself.
Well, that's what I meant.
Lord. Now, it seems to be things... It seems to be things that the other nations were doing that are sinful in some way. Now, what were tattoos then? They were used, you would do it by either branding a person or you would cut them until it scarred their body.
Which is what it says. You are not to make gashes on your body for the dead. That's why
we don't gash each other with
but that's
knives
why
these days.
I felt like that's what it was trying to say. You shouldn't mark your bodies up for the dead. And I still have a problem with, putting crosses on your body and scripture. I'm like, do we do that? I mean, I guess. Like, I don't know where that I stand on all that, or where God stands on that.
Yeah, so it's in the same section as you can't eat anything with blood in it. In the same section as you can't practice divination or witchcraft. In the same section where you're not allowed to cut the sides of your head or the edge of your beard. So the hair at the sides of your head. So you can't just cut off the sides of your hair. If you're going to cut off your hair, you got to cut it all off. And you can't just do the sides of your beard. So these seems to be ways that the other priests would array themselves, display themselves for their gods,
So maybe
or for the dead.
Why it's saying don't gash your body or put those tattoo marks.
We
on yourself.
Also might be missing context that they had that we don't.
Yeah,
like they knew why they were doing this, and we don't. Well,
what's your personal opinion?
I think it's not similar enough for me to be able to say that the tattoos we get today are the same kind and done in the same way as they're done then.
I have.
You obviously shouldn't cut yourself.
Right.
Cutting yourself is not good, except in maybe rare circumstances where maybe you have to leach out poison, but that's definitely not what this is talking about. It's talking about just gashing yourself, and that one says for the dead, or putting tattoo marks on yourself. Tattoos done today are done with sterilized needles, and you inject ink into people. They didn't do that then. Tattoos today are probably very different than the brands and the cutting that they would do to scar their bodies for that.
And that's kind of what I felt like. And here's the thing. I kind of go both ways because I'm a huge fan of tattoos. I love them. I think they're such art and they say a lot. And if you have something to say and you know you're going to want to say that the rest of your life, then get it. My tattoo on my hip has my husband's name. I did that as a present for him. But I had already gotten it when I was in the world. I just put his name in it because it's a tribal son. And that was his wedding gift. It was that. And we joke because he says, oh, it's so small. Like it's a little sun and it says Alex in the middle of it. And he's like, yep, you got that little video and you could just fill it in if anything ever happens to me. But so we joke about that because he got one to cover a really, really old tattoo. He'd gotten when he was like a teenager. He got one with a crown that has my initials and our wedding date in it because I got his name for his wedding gift. So for like Valentine's Day or an anniversary, he got that crown with my initials and my anniversary. But, we had discussed tattoos for Lent. And then after my nephew committed suicide, and, the more that I, dwelled on it and thought of it and just was like, what could we have done? All this. I wanted to get this tattoo, which is, the symbol of your story's not over yet. And it's used in suicide awareness. And, it's a conversation starter. Like I can talk to people like our story's not over. Like we can go through some pretty rough, really rough times, but the Lord is there. Our story's not over. He's still working on us. We can get through that. But it's just, and then when Trey wanted a tattoo, when Ryan wanted a tattoo, both of the boys, not you, of course, but my other two sons, we talked at length. We studied the Bible at length. I didn't have a problem with the tattoos. The only things that I said was, I just don't get the feeling that God is like against them, and I may be wrong, and I will have to ask him to forgive me. My thing is two things with it. I seem to find that it's offensive to some people.
Yes.
And so I try, like, especially older people, they get really offended by tattoos. Like, oh, that's so gross.
Well, it's also not very aesthetically pleasing if you're covered in them.
So, or, if it's something like huge and someone doesn't agree with it. So that can be kind of offensive. But, like you could wear some offensive shirt. Like, it doesn't always just have to be body art. It could be anything on you that you should just try not to be offensive to others. But you can't always be not offensive to others. But you can try. So my thing was that I told Ryan and Trey was just let's try to get it somewhere where it's not so noticeable. Like if I feel like I might be offensive to somebody, I can put a bracelet or a watch here, and I'm good. And the other one, I've always made sure that one's covered. Like you don't see it unless I want you to see it, unless I'm in a bathing suit. So and that's what I told them, and which Ryan came back with it down his arm, so you kind of can see it, and I cried because at that time I was just like, oh my gosh, that's going to be horrible, blah blah. But Trey did. He got his on his chest so that you don't see it unless he really wants you to. But that was my first thing. Like, I don't want to be offensive to others. I think it's really hard to spread the gospel if someone is if you're standing there and you're offensive to someone, like you've got a tattoo on your body or a bunch of tattoos. And I think it may be hard to get through to somebody, but then again, it might be easier to get through to somebody else who has tattoos. So I don't know how to go about that one. But the other one is that every tattoo place that I have been in has felt so evil and had so much like almost demonic stuff on the walls. We know the one had demonic music on.
Nudity plastered on there with books and walls.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever been in one that I didn't feel like my spirit was screaming out, like, get out. Like, and thankfully I would like do my fill in or whatever and get out.
That could also be because the church typically doesn't look well on tattoos, so there just aren't any sort of Christian tattoo parlors because the Christians wouldn't be doing it really.
Yeah. Well, and the one that, Trey's dad always said was a Christian one, I don't know about that. Not from the stuff that Trey said.
I mean, I think this is going to be my final comment until I research this even more.
Yeah.
It's very hard to say this still applies today unless you can give us some understanding of why it applied then.
Yeah.
So the idea of not crossing two kinds of seed or your garments was specific laws for Israel to be different from the nations, and the nations could see that they're different just by the way they lived and the way they tended their fields. Is there a way for us to do that today, or that's been reiterated in the New Testament? Well, I think so. We live very upstanding lives. We talk about Jesus all the time. And we represent him in the way we live, speak, and just move and do our lives. Now, are there visible ways like Israel had? I don't know. That's a good question. I would love to go through the New Testament and see if there's anything visibly that we could appropriate to show that we are Christians, because crosses don't do it these days. That's just
because everybody has one.
Everybody has a fashion symbol of a cross, basically.
So in 20, it literally goes through all these again. Like, anyone who sacrifices children to Moloch must be stoned to death. No mediums or spiritists. No adultery. And their death is their own fault. I love that part. It's like the Lord just says, it ain't on us. It ain't on me. It's their own fault. No homosexuality. No bestiality. And it's just talking about how they'll be burned to death for the depravity. And no incest. So it just goes into the list of all the...
Yeah, so he's reiterating it again so they understand how bad this is.
Yeah.
And then in chapter 20, verse 22, it says, you got to do this, otherwise it'll vomit you out. You can't do the things that the other nations did, So whatever that tattoo mark comment is something that the nations were doing that God said is wrong.
Yeah.
So whatever they were doing that for, because if you just think about it, it's in the same section.
You think they were doing it like as a tribute to their God?
It could be. It's in the same section as cutting the edge of your beard, the hair on the sides of your head.
Oh, well, I don't know what is that for then?
It's in the same section.
Well, I know, but what did they do that for?
I don't know. I think it was either a form of worship or communication with the dead. Maybe practices with that since it's connected into that section.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also couched in between witchcraft, divination, mediums, and spiritists.
Yeah, because it says do not go to a medium or a spiritist to talk to the dead. And
Correct.
then right after that it says do not make gashes on your body.
That's before that.
Oh, well, I put it here and then here.
So. Well, I think he probably reiterates it again.
Okay.
Actually, he doesn't reiterate the tattoo marks or the gash or the cutting off of the edge of your beard. He says that once. In the time when he says all these things again, he reiterates the child sacrifice, the mediums and spiritists, and a bunch of the sexual acts, just to make sure they really understand you can't do this. And then he says that anyone who consults mediums, spiritists must be put to death. They have to be stoned
to death,
and their death is their own fault. That just means they were guilty, and so you killing them doesn't mean you're at fault for their death.
I like how it actually even spells out priests. Like priests cannot marry a prostitute or a divorced woman or a widow.
Oh, I found the answer.
Okay.
Chapter 21, verse 5. Priests may not make bald spots on their heads, shave the edges of their beards, or make gashes on their bodies. They are to be holy to their God and not profane the name of their God. For they present the food offerings to the Lord, the food of their God, and they must be holy. They are not to marry a woman who has been defiled by prostitution. They are not to marry one divorced by her husband.
This is what
So, basically, these rules are about the priesthood. So, these were the things that the nation's priests before them were doing. And if it was the priest doing it, it means it's connected to worship or the dead in some way. Because the priests would also, of the pagan nations, would also sometimes be mediums and spiritists for the. Yeah, so it says priests may not do this. So priests can't make bald spots on their heads, shave the edges of their beard, or make gashes on their bodies. Why? It says they are to be holy and not profane the name of their God. So that means by not doing this, they are separating themselves from some sort of practice that the nations before them were doing that the Lord said was detestable. Now, why is shaving your beard detestable? I think it's because of what they were doing it for, not just because shaving the edge of your beard is wrong in itself. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But during this time period, you couldn't do it. I think there's might be a good rule here. If it's going to hurt your ministry and you're a leader in the church, just don't get tattoos.
But what if you already have them?
Then.
Or what if you don't have a problem with them and you get them someplace where you don't feel like you're going to be offensive to others? I think that's okay.
You have to A-OK it with your congregation and your eldership.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's a hard one. But anyway, the priest cannot marry a prostitute or a divorced woman or a widow. He must marry a virgin. So literally, like, they're held to a very high standard, like nothing but pure. Because they're going to be standing before God. And then one thing that I found odd, but not odd, because we have to be pure to stand before God and to present anything to God, like because He doesn't come near to sin, is that these people could have no physical defect whatsoever. So what we call handicapped, and we want them to be in charge of everything and be a part of everything. God said, nope. If you're handicapped,
we don't want the handicapped in charge of everything.
You know what I mean? Okay. Like, we don't want to exclude them because of their defect, right? That would just be discrimination. So, but God said,
Well, this
if
is also
you're missing an arm or a leg, you can't come in here.
This is the same God who said you can't mistreat them because they're blind or deaf.
Right. But I'm saying, as far as doing a food offering or coming into the tent of meeting,
yes,
that if you had a defect, you could not do that.
You can't be a hunchback. You can't be a dwarf. You can't have any sort of defect. You cannot be. You can't be an illegitimate child. I read that one somewhere else.
Yeah, I know. I'll get to that too.
So you have to be born of a proper marriage.
Children of illegitimate people.
To the 10th generation, which just means you can never.
Yeah.
For as long as, basically. So
all these people with the defects could not come into the temple or
correct.
the tent of meeting.
Now, why is that? Because you're representing God's holiness.
Right.
And God is perfect without any defect or blemish. So priests are supposed to reflect that. And also, the priesthood is foreshadowing Jesus, who had no defect.
Right.
He was completely sinless, completely perfect. So their physical reality is representing the spiritual reality of Jesus. And probably Jesus' physical reality. I am 100% sure he had no physical defects either, in addition to his sinlessness.
He wouldn't.
Doesn't mean he was the prettiest man ever, but just means...
Well, it's just assumed that he would have been average looking. But we also assume, because we definitely... I would bet my life on it that he had no physical defects, because, he is the child of God, but the Son of God. But it also says they do not present anything that has a defect. It will not be accepted.
Now, they are still priests. They just can't come forward and present anything.
Yeah.
So they're not allowed to go into the sanctuary to present these offerings, because they aren't...
Because everything in there has to be unblemished.
Everything in there has to be holy and set apart to the Lord.
I did have a question about this. Do not eat any animal that died naturally or was mauled by wild beasts. I don't understand that.
If an animal dies naturally or is mauled by wild beasts, it means it wasn't killed by the priests and its blood wasn't emptied out in the proper way for them to be able to...
Oh, okay. So they mean through a sacrifice. Because I thought that just meant don't eat it. Like, if they went out and found a deer that was killed and they wanted to eat it.
They couldn't eat it.
They couldn't eat it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Because the priest hasn't emptied the blood out in the correct ritual sacrifice.
So they could never eat any meat unless it was killed by the priest?
Unless they were A-okayed by God or the priest to do it.
So they could eat bread all the time, just not meat unless it was a priest.
Typically, they were taught how to do it, to empty the blood out, so the priests could drain the blood for the people. Now, if the people killed their own livestock, they had to follow a certain process of draining the blood. If an animal dies naturally or is mauled, I don't think you can follow the correct process anymore.
I guess not.
I think that there's probably stuff physically going on there that just prevent it from being drained properly at that point.
So, didn't you go through, what day is this one? Day 4, and it's telling you all the different festivals and all the different, celebrations. And I noticed that it continues to say self-denial.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that mean?
Fasting.
That's what I was thinking. So, whenever it's talking about self-denial, I was right. It meant to fast. Okay. So, deny yourself from food or something important to you, right?
Mostly just food. They didn't have these weird fast rules that we have. I'm going to fast for my video games or something like that. No, it was food. It was almost always food or water. It was your necessities.
It would fast from water?
If it was really serious, Queen Esther did it for 3 days.
She didn't drink water for 3 days?
If you go back and read the account, she fasted from food and water for 3 days and then approached him.
She fasted for food. I don't remember it being water. So I love the story about the Israelite mother and the Egyptian father who brought their son to Moses.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can find that one. I wrote a little footnote about it. What wasn't he doing something? He blasphemed.
He was horrible. He curses God.
Yeah, the son cursed and blasphemed the name of God, and they brought him to Moses. It tells his mother's name, and they put him in custody until the Lord's decision could be made clear to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, "Bring the one who has cursed to the outside of the camp, and have all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and then have the whole community stone him." Now that is some devotion, that you would bring your own child out there.
Also notice they only mention the mother's name because she's the Israelite.
Right.
Now, it says they both bring him. So the Egyptian was presumably agreed with the mother that this son needed to, something needed to happen.
He was like,
Remember, the Egyptians that left with the Israelites quite likely served and followed. They had to serve and follow Yahweh after they got to Mount Sinai. Otherwise, they would have been kicked out or stoned. But so, yeah, you can't curse God and get away with it.
Yeah.
You have to be perfect. And God has sacrifice system set up when you're not perfect. However, there were some things in this covenant that just couldn't be covered because of how serious they were. Murder, certain sexual acts, certain other acts, and almost every kind of act when it comes to worshiping God or honoring God. And this son just dishonored God by cursing his name. By the way, his name, the name, would mean he cursed Yahweh. He used Yahweh's
actual name.
He cursed that. He cursed him. So, and if anyone curses God, he will bear his sin. And then this is what he will bear is death. He is to be put to death, whether they're an alien who's living among you or a native. Which just goes to show how serious it is to curse God.
Yeah.
Also, if a child cursed their parents and didn't repent, they were to be put to death too.
So, day 4 at the end of it is basically telling us like the rules or how to be a good neighbor.
Yeah. How to love God and love others.
I'm like reading it and it made me think of that, like a good neighbor. I'm not kidding you. It was stuck in my head while I was reading it. But yeah, it was basically like how to be a good neighbor. Day 5, the Lord is telling them, if you follow me, I will give you, and he says, rain, produce, fruit, plenty of food, peace, and security. No dangerous animals, no swords. Enemies will fall before you. But if you do not follow me or obey me, I will bring terror on you, wasting disease, fever. Your eyes will fail. Your life will ebb away. You will sow seed in vain, and you will be defeated by your enemies. You will have no produce, no fruit. I will send wild animals after you. There will be pestilence, and I will discipline you 7 times and multiply your plagues. I am the Lord. That is pretty scary.
Yep.
Like, seriously, people. Like, and guess what? What do we do every time God spells it out for us?
We don't listen.
I know. I'm so shocked. Like, these people could have went forever without ever having to be scared of anything. That God would just take complete care of them.
Do you realize, though, that God did intend for them to follow these rules, by the way?
Right.
He says it multiple times, you need to follow these, you need to follow these, you need to follow these. But he never says, if you do this, you're going to live with me forever and ever. Basically salvation. The concept of righteousness, of being righteous, is not ever said in here to come from following the law. Following the law means you get to stay in the land and enjoy the benefits of the land that God has given you. Righteousness is only said one time so far to have come, and it was for Abraham, who trusted God, and God credited it to him as righteousness.
That's true.
So, if you fail this and you lose the land, but you still trust the Lord and you repent and you keep seeking Him, even if the rest of the Israelites failed over and over again, and you're stuck in exile with them, you'll be saved because you trusted the Lord. Maybe not back to your land, but you'll be saved eventually because you've been credited as righteous.
So then in Numbers, I don't know if this is Numbers. It's where he's talking about every tenth belongs to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might have been, was it in Leviticus? I think it was in the end of Leviticus where he's talking about every tenth belongs to the Lord. Yeah, every tenth of the land's produce, grain from the soil or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord. It is holy to the Lord. Then it goes on to go over all of the census of these tribes that are all like war age, like army age, right? You know how we do, everybody signs up at 18. This one, how old were they? I don't remember what it said. But anyway, all of these people, like Reuben's tribe, they registered for the army. That's what I'm going to call it. They're registering for the army. 46,500 of them registered for the army. Oh, 20-year-olds and up. So we do 18-year-olds and up. They did 20 years old and up. Simon's tribe registered 59,300. Gad's tribe registered 45,650. Judah's tribe registered 74,600. Issachar's tribe registered 54,400. Zebulun's tribe registered 57,400. Ephraim's tribe registered 40,500. Manasseh's tribe registered 32,200. Benjamin's tribe registered 35,400. Dan's tribe registered 62,700. Asher's tribe registered 41,500. And Naphtali's tribe registered 53,400. So there was a total of 603,550
men 20 years older.
Yeah, 20 years old and older. So when you think of all the people who left Egypt, you are not imagining that amount of people. I'm not. When I think of all those people, I'm thinking thousands of people, right? I think there may have been millions. 2 million. Yeah. So you think there's about 2 million people that left Egypt?
There's men 20 years and older.
Mm-hmm.
Then you count in women, their wives.
The Levites. They weren't counted.
The Levites weren't counted.
Right.
All of their kids and any servants/slaves, and they could have had more than one wife.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say somewhere in the 2 million range, which means if Egypt was able to keep them oppressed, Egypt was a real strong military. And the populations of these people groups during this time period was actually way bigger than a lot of scholars think.
I know. You don't even picture it. Like, I always thought, yeah, there was thousands of people that left Egypt. Yay. Like, that was a great story, blah, blah, blah. But the more that I read and the more that I think about it, like, 2 million people left?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Like, that is unbelievable.
Now, why did the population not grow to such extremes like it is today? I think they had lots of kids, and that if they lived past that age, they would live for a while because they're measuring from 20 years and older. It means they have to expect to have enough. And they had 603,000 people that were 20 years or older.
Mm-hmm.
So, and David later in the Psalms will say, like, oh, humankind, you give them like 70 or 80 years to live. They had the same life expectancy that we do.
Mm-hmm.
So why is it that our population is just now booming? That's a legitimate question I have.
Who knows? So then in day 6, the Lord talks about how the Levites are his. They are he says that in several different places. He claims them as his people, like his servants.
They were the ones who stood up.
The anointed priests.
After the Israelites worshipped the golden idol, the Levites were the first ones to strike down any that didn't repent.
That's true.
That's why he chose them.
Yep. And then we hear the story about Aaron's son, the firstborn Nadab. How do you say it?
Nadab and Abihu.
And Nadab was the oldest one, the firstborn. And then Abihu was the secondborn. And what was it that they did? I forgot.
They offered unauthorized fire.
Yes. And they were struck down.
The Lord literally shoots flames out and kills them.
Yeah, they die right there in the presence of the Lord. And it doesn't seem like Aaron really mourned them.
It says he remained quiet.
Yeah.
It just means he didn't say anything.
Can you imagine? That's horrible.
I mean, what could you say? God, you're wrong.
Well, it wasn't that, but wouldn't you just
he can't mourn them?
But God said no.
Mourn them. He can't do the traditional mourning. I mean, mentally and
emotionally. I'd have broke down.
Oh yeah, he probably could have cried. It just means he didn't say anything back to God when he says he remained quiet.
I would not have said. I'd be like, yeah. That's what's so funny is all the times that the Israelites continued to complain and gripe and all that, and then God would strike them down, and then they would do it again. I'm just like, I would be like, what are you doing? Did you not just see thousands of people die? Cut it off. Be quiet. But they don't. So let's see. The number of the Levites, males 1 month old or more. So he starts counting all the Levites. That was 22,000. Registered Levites 1 month old or older, I think it was 8,600, and at the end it was 22,000, right? That was responsible for the duties of the sanctuary.
That means they were the smallest clan.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's because they went around and killed their brothers during that golden calf incident. And so they send out their own population.
So Aaron and his sons are to finish covering the holy objects and all their equipment whenever the camp is to move on. Nobody else can touch those objects or they will die. And don't we hear the story later of when they slip, when they're carrying the Ark of the Tabernacle and they slip and one of them accidentally touches it and he just falls dead?
So the Levites are allowed to carry it using special poles.
Yeah.
And they're allowed to set up certain things. But the priests have to be the ones who carry certain objects. Levites are not priests. Right. Levites get to help with the temple and other duties with the priests.
But where is it? Because I don't think we've read it yet, where one of them slips and grabs hold of it and dies.
And then David gets mad at him.
So
he gets mad at God. But then he also realizes, oh, well, what am I doing? And then he sends the ark back. He doesn't touch it anymore, if I remember correctly.
All right, let's see what we got. Holy water and dust and a curse. The priest will require the woman to take an oath and will say to her, if no man has slept with you, if you have not gone astray and become defiled while under your husband's authority, be unaffected by this bitter water that brings a curse. So if the husband becomes jealous and thinks that his wife had an affair, he can go and they'll throw holy water and dust on her. And they'll ask her point blank if she's cheated on him. And they'll place a curse on her.
Correct.
Yeah. Or the water, does she drink the water? She takes some of the dust from the tabernacle floor and puts it in the water and drinks it. And if she's lying, then she'll be cursed, right? It's pretty cool. It curses her. It says the water that will bring a curse to enter your stomach, causing your belly to swell and your womb to shrivel. So she will never have children again. But I mean, either way, she's kind of doomed. If she cheated and says I cheated, she's going to be stoned to death.
Well, yeah, that's
But-
why you just don't cheat.
But I know, but I'm saying, and then if she is gonna lie about it, then she's never gonna have children.
Correct.
And then that'll be obvious that she lied
Correct, but you still can't put her to death.
because she lied about it.
She lied, so you don't have enough witnesses, but you
That's true.
the curse takes effect and she won't have any kids anymore. So basically it's a way of dealing with a liar.
Yeah.
However, some people will say, well, why can't the man get a curse too? Well, the man doesn't bear kids. So the only thing you could curse him with is what? His semen doesn't work. But they didn't fully understand. They just knew that they had to have sex. Now, and I mean, yeah, they knew that their seed, but they didn't know anything about infertility for men. So they wouldn't have understood the curse, and the curse is meant to be there to help people understand what's happening. And women, childbirth is one of their big things. Especially during this time period where, like, if I can't have kids, I'm going to die. You better give me kids, man. So this is like a real big curse.
Yeah.
And so the man, if he wrongly suspects her, it's laid out somewhere else that he has to pay a fine of 100 silver.
All that.
Why? Well, the man is accusing her of being a prostitute. Right. He's slandering her. So he's paying a fine for slander. The woman dies, though, because if she's actually did the thing, that she committed adultery, which is very different and deserves death. So the man gets fined for slander. And then I believe he can't divorce her ever and has to provide for her for the rest of her life. Yeah. So
good for God for that law.
Well, I mean, they're like, oh, you're making her stay with him, that horrible man. Well, no. Well, yes, but the reason why is if a woman is slandered by her husband and then divorced, that's double humiliation. She'll never get married again and she'll die because no one will take care of her.
But it is really sad during the biblical days because not only that, but like if a guy rapes a virgin, then he just has to pay her father and then he's married to her for the rest of her life.
No,
so that's great. You're married to your rapist.
So if you
because it's later on in like week 12 week 11 that you read about it.
If a man seduces a virgin and has sex, he has to pay
and marry
her for the rest of her life.
No, it says rapes.
If a man rapes a woman,
that's a virgin
in the city, and she does not cry out, they both die. They both die because she should have cried out and he raped a woman. If a man rapes a woman in the countryside where she can't cry out and no one can hear her, she's presumed innocent. The man dies. If a man seduces a virgin and has sex with her, so this is fornication, he has to pay the family a price, marry her for the rest of his life, take care of her.
Yeah. So you're married to your rapist. Yay.
Well, it uses the word seduce, not rape in that.
It does use the word rape in my Bible, doesn't it?
We'll have to look at that section.
We'll get to that. It's in like week 11. But that's the end of this week.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and stop this video. And then we'll get back with y'all and do this next week 9 video. And then tomorrow we're going to do week 10 and week 11.
All right. Love you guys.
Love you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.